pictures of Jesus growing up. I don't know if you grew up in church. How many of you grew up in church or went to church as a kid, anything like this? You know what a flannel graph is. Anybody know it? Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in church, and I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but all the pictures that we had of Jesus, do you remember this? He was like a really good-looking white dude. Do you remember this? He had long hair, and he had the big sash. Remember the big blue sash? Do you remember this? I remember going to doctor's offices. I grew up in the South, and they would have like this big Jesus storybook thing, and the picture of Jesus on there was like, he just like herbal essence. Like he just looked like that. You know what I mean? And we just kind of forget that he's not just, some of y'all like, what's that? Yeah. But a little bit, like if he were to do this, you'd just be like, go Jesus. Like there's a little bit of that. And I don't know if you've seen these pictures, and a lot of times he was holding like a baby lamb. Do you remember this? Like he's just like petting, just like a baby lamb. And I just laughed going like, our view of Jesus was so interesting. And usually the stories that we told, like at least in my head, his tone of voice, he was just very kind. Like he's just so like happy all the time. Like it's just like happy Jesus, you know what I mean? And then you start reading, you get a little bit older, you start reading through the New Testament, and you find these moments where Jesus says things where you're just like, oh my gosh. Like he said at one point, like you get these quotes and you're like, that's really strong language. You get like brood of vipers. You're like, what does that mean? It's like, no, that's not nice. You know what I mean? Like that's not like, oh, hold me. You know what I mean? It's not sweet baby lamb, herbal essence Jesus. There's pieces of Jesus where he gets upset, and not like a little bit upset, but like frustrated, like angry, upset. There's these moments, and a lot of people reference this where he goes into the temple, and people forget this part, but everybody talks about how he turns over the tables. You know what I mean? Like he gets angry, he turns over the tables, and it's not like a oops, like it wasn't that. He turned over the tables, and then he grabs a whip, and he starts like going Braveheart on things, and you're like, what is that? Like there's a piece of Jesus that sometimes we miss. And one of the questions I think is so interesting is like, what are the things that frustrated Jesus? Like, what are the things that actually made Jesus like get upset? Now, when you talk about this, and some of you may have felt this too, and you saw like the branding of the logo, most of us, including me, we see branding like this and we go, oh, he's about to talk about, you know what I mean? And we have our list of things that's either connected to what we want Jesus to think or what we want Jesus to say, or politics, all these kinds of things. And you see all of these. And then one of my favorite questions, which I love, is somebody that doesn't attend our church saw the branding, and I thought this was so interesting. They're like, well, Jesus wouldn't undo anything because Jesus is all powerful. And if Jesus wanted to undo it, he would just undo it, right? And I was like, that's deep. That's so good. I was like, you might have been thinking about it deeper than I was. That was really good. But what's interesting too is like what we believe is like, yes, Jesus has this all-powerful sort of thing, but at the same time, there's something connected to Jesus' heart where he allows us to have free will. Like he allows you to choose yes or no to things. He allows you to choose to actually do things that would hurt you, which is weird. He allows, in some ways, you to sin. And that's a weird kind of thing where you go, like, Jesus could change everything, but Jesus doesn't choose to do it like that. Like Jesus didn't come down and forcefully make you not do some of the things that maybe you've done in the past. Some of you like look back at your like college experience in your 20s, and if Jesus hadn't have given you free will, you would have maybe been really bored in college. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of that, where it's like he allows you to make decisions. And so the idea of what would Jesus undo is almost like the heart of a father. You know what I mean? Like some of you think about it like this, where there are things that I think maybe break Jesus' heart, or things that make Jesus really frustrated or angry. There are things that Jesus gets amped about in the New Testament. And the things that he gets amped about are actually tied to the betterment of humanity and the way that we treat each other and the way that we love one another and the way that we do those sorts of things. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about today is one of those things that it's hard because as soon as I start telling you about it, there's a little bit of like, it might even feel like a letdown, but it's one of the things that Jesus actually got most amped about. And one of the things that he got most amped about is when he looks at people who were close followers of him. One of the things that he got amped about is this idea of just being indifferent about the things that are around them, you know? Now, I will say this, living in Western culture, living in Dublin, Ohio, like the things that, our lives are so fascinating because there are things that I care about, and then maybe you're like me, you're certainly a better person than me. There are things that I kind of care about, but then I project that I care about a lot. You know what I'm talking about? Like if you go on Facebook, you see this all the time. Like people are like, they're real amped about certain things. And then all of a sudden you're like, but you've never given to that. You've never served in that. You care about it because everybody else cares about it for the next 15 minutes. And at some point along the way, it's going to bypass thing. Now, what's also interesting, and you know this too, is we don't have, like, honestly, we don't have the emotional capacity to care about everything that everybody cares about at once. You know, like sometimes some of you felt this in like 2020 and 2021, and even now, like you're going like every few weeks, it feels like there's something that bubbles up that is the most important thing in the world that we all should care about at the same time. And at the end of the day, it's hard for us to deeply care about all of those things at once. But what Jesus does is he looks at some of his closest followers and he sees this indifference thing sort of bubbling up. And what's interesting is indifference, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of look at it. We could certainly formally define this, but it's more, I think for me, indifference is kind of like this, like I care-ish. You know what I mean? Like I do, like I care, I certainly care, but I care-ish, right? Now the safe places that we talk about this are like you have those like family members, you know what I'm talking about? Who always have things that are like spiraling and chaotic and a little bit nuts. And here's what both of these things are true. You care about them and you love them. You certainly love them and you care about them. But there's also like but I mean, you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of the ish part. You're like, well, you kind of brought that on yourself. You know what I mean? Or you kind of, and there's like I care, but I kind of care-ish. And what it leads us to is like this sort of emotional place where we might actually believe that things should be a different way, or we might actually believe that things should look a different way, but we don't really, like to our bones, care about that. Now, there's this phenomenon that I've loved reading about, right? So some of you know, I'm an Enneagram 8, so like there's the whole drive thing. It's certainly unhealthy. There's all these kinds of things. But there's this thing, I'll read article after article about this, about the workplace right now. How many of you ever heard about like the quiet quitting thing? Has anybody ever seen this? This is so fascinating. Now, it's funny, every manager probably in the room is like, oh my gosh. Every HR person is like, oh my gosh. And then some people who aren't, you're like, absolutely, that's what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like, my boss sucks. You know what I mean? Like you get, like there's a little bit of that. Now, here's what's so fascinating, and you get this too. The quiet quitting thing is fascinating, not whether it's good or bad or whether you should work more hours. That's not at all what it is. But there's something about even our culture right now, like this cultural moment that's so interesting. Because what's happening in a lot of ways, and you know this, is that we are so easily, specifically when it comes to work, easily disengaging, or it's easy for us to disengage from the things that we spend a lot of time doing, right? You work a lot, right? And it's easy for us to go, I just don't care about it that much. Now, again, there's like bosses that are not good, and then there's like this whole thing where like you have to work so many hours and you're not getting paid, like all that, for sure. But then there's also a piece of this at the guts of it where we go, how easily and quickly we can pull back and disengage. And in some ways, on the overarching vision of some of the things that we do, experience apathy in our lives, right? We just experience sort of apathy in certain areas of our lives. Some of you experience this in parenting. Some of you are parents in the room, and you know this. Come on, if we're real honest. There are moments that you always love your kids. There are moments that you're super engaged, and then moments where you get home and you're on your phone and you're just not quite fully there. You know what I mean? I felt bad. I was in Texas this week, and I got back, and as a moment, have you ever just been like real tired as a parent? If the answer to that is no, I think you're lying. but there's a piece that I just walked in, and my son had asked me the same thing 3 times. Dad, can we do this? Dad, can we do this? And he wanted to like draw pictures and then compete, but he always wins, which is why I don't like to play. It's fine. But you know, there's a little bit of this, and I love that he asked me over and over and over again. We did it once, and then we wanted to do it over and over again, and he doesn't care that I was on a plane for like 6 hours. He doesn't care that they charged me for the Wi-Fi and it didn't work, and I'm still a little bit upset about that. American Airlines. $20, you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of that. What he cares about is like, are you here with me? And it's funny, I was just a little bit apathetic as a parent. And this shows up in so many different areas of our lives. And what's interesting is this one of the things that frustrated Jesus the most. And so one of the questions that I want us to think about, and we talked about it a little bit, but what does this area that I'm engaged in or involved in, does it affect my time, my financial, and my emotional resources? And there are certain things in your life that probably should matter more than they do. And here's the honest part, faith is one of those things for a lot of people, right? Faith is one of those things that you can easily put on the back burner because it doesn't feel like an immediate felt need all the time. Like it's kind of one of those things that when somebody's sick, you really care about it a lot. Or, you know, when you're trying to wrestle through something's not going your way, it bubbles up. But then there's a piece of this, you know this, where you can do every other thing in your life, it seems like, and miss the depths of your faith and miss the fact that it deserves time and it deserves your resources. And this is the other one. It certainly deserves your emotional resources as well, right? When you get this, I grew up where we, at least early on in our home, when I was a kid, we had to read our Bible every day. And by we, I don't know why I'm talking like I have brothers and sisters. Me, I had to read my Bible every day, And I'll never forget, like, you can do this where I would read as much as I had to do to be done. And then check it off and just be done with it. And I would pray prayers real fast, and it was just enough to feel like I did something, but I wasn't actually engaged in my faith. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a passage of scripture where Jesus gets frustrated, and he gets frustrated with some of his closest followers. And here's what I love about this passage is you can blink and miss it. You can blink and miss what he says. And so what he's going to do is you're going to see this moment where he's going to do something extraordinary. And then afterwards, what you're going to see is you're going to see his closest followers get frustrated and him frustrated sort of at them. And then he gives a parable. And the parable that he gives, I'll just tell you where we're going, is a parable that gets misused and overly used. And it's so simple. In fact, it's so overly used sometimes, you just probably don't even care about it anymore, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the passage, and we're going to look at the original language of what it talks about. But give you a little bit of context. Jesus is with his disciples. He's just had this extraordinary moment. So he's been healing people. He's been doing extraordinary things, and his closest followers have seen these be beyond natural moments over and over and over again, powerful sort of things where they look back and they're like, I don't even understand how that happened. And so what happens is Jesus is a little bit famous in the ancient world, right? He just is. He's a little bit got that Bieber thing where he just walks in and everybody, I just compared Jesus to Bieber. Anyway, that'll be the YouTube thumbnail, Bieber. It's great. But he shows up and people flock to him. They just flock to him in part because of his miracles. And so you have this father who has this kid, and they can't figure out the medical thing. And so he shows up to Jesus about healing. And so here's Matthew's account. Here's what happens. It says, when they came, says Jesus, a crowd of people, all these people together, his close followers, a man approached Jesus, and I love this, and he knelt before him, right? So he doesn't come to Jesus and just hey, let me talk to you, right? The image here, especially in the Greek, isn't that he just comes and quietly kneels. He comes and falls at his feet. He comes and he falls at the feet of Jesus, which is what you do when your kid's sick, right? When your kid's sick and you can't figure it out, that's what you do. He comes to Jesus, desperate, kneels before him, and he says this, Lord, have mercy on my son, which I love this. Not, Lord, just heal my son. Not, Lord, just fix it. Have mercy. In your grace, I want you to see him where he is, and I want you to move from what you see. Lord, have mercy on my son. And he goes on, and then he explains what's going on. He says he has seizures, and he's suffering greatly. And he often falls into the fire, into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him, which is fascinating. So we'll break this down real quickly. What's interesting is the Greek word here for seizures is actually a word that's moonstruck, right? And so what we find, and however this looks, and you could talk about the medical side of this all day long, but maybe he's having these epileptic sort of seizures, or maybe he's having these things that trigger it. And what happens when he gets triggered is he loses control of his body. And so this is he falls into fire or he falls into water. The dad's just worried. The dad's I can't figure out how to control this. Nobody can fix this. Here's what's going on. And then what happens is, and I love this, Jesus had given authority to his disciples to heal. They've seen Jesus heal. They have the power to do these things. And so this dad brings the kid to Jesus' closest followers. And he's like, look, I brought him over here. And the people who follow you closely couldn't figure out how to do it. And you kind of get this moment where you almost get this frustration of what Jesus is feeling. Can you imagine this? I know it sounds kind of out there, but if you had a gift of being able to heal people, and Jesus said, hey, look, you're not in your own strength, but I'm giving you what I have to go heal people. And then all of a sudden, a dad whose kids is struggling goes to the disciples, and they're not able to do it. Jesus gets a little amped. He gets a little bit frustrated, right? It's not like sweet little lamb, herbal essence, Jesus. That was awesome. And you're welcome, Here's what Jesus says. He says, you unbelieving and perverse generation. Now let's just, real quick. There's no nice way to say that. You unbelieving, this is not sweet dreams, you unbelieving and perverse generation. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. Now, this is real talk. If somebody said that, I'm I don't know if I'm bringing my boy to you. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's not. And it's interesting. He's not just addressing the disciples, even though he is. He's addressing all the crowd that's around looking on. Like, have you not seen me do miraculous things? Have you not seen me teach on these things? I've given you this gift of healing. Have you not seen it? And he's like this, you unbelieving and perverse, which is fascinating. Unbelieving going, you've seen me do miraculous things, and it's still like you don't believe. You've seen me do all of these miraculous things, and it's like you still don't believe that it can be done. Right? It's so funny. In the original language, it's so fascinating because it's connected to unfaithfulness. It's like they're not faithful to the call and the gifting and what Jesus had given them. You're not faithful to the teaching. You're not faithful to what I've told you that you could do and even seen me do. You're going and it's not happening. And then he goes perverse, meaning like you lack the purity to be able to see with the kind of eyes that you need to see. To be able to see with the kind of strength that you need to see. To be able to see things in this like natural realm of things that don't exist yet but can exist, which feels way out there and also true. Like, you can't see with those eyes. And so what Jesus does next is even out of the frustration, and I love this, he does this, he goes on. So Jesus rebukes the demon, which we can talk about that for a second, and it came out of the boy and he was healed at that moment. Now, some of you in the room, you're going like demons, and we're talking about angels and demons, I don't know about that, which is, I get that, but whatever was causing what happened stopped. And this is the other thing, we talk about demons all day long, we talk about all this kind of stuff, which again, that's what everybody signs up to talk about all day long, is demons. It's Halloween-ish though, right? But there was a tangible expression of what was gripping this boy that was no longer gripping this boy anymore. So you can talk about demons with a pitchfork, I don't think it's that. Whatever caused the thing that was causing him to experience these things tangibly was gone when Jesus moved. And it says he was healed. Now, I don't know exactly how that happens. I wish I had like this beautiful medical response on what that means. I don't, but we have these eyewitness accounts of people that go like, he was this way and he's not anymore. And tangibly, the thing that felt like he was holding him was tangibly not happening anymore. And what happens next is so fun for me because I imagine that Jesus is frustrated and he's amped. His disciples are around kind of feeling like failures because they could have, but then they didn't, right? And so all this kind of dies down. I feel like the crowds would have probably died down. And then the disciples come to Jesus. Now I want you to picture this. I don't know how many of them. There were 12 of them, but I don't know how many came up to him, but a handful of them, however many come up to Jesus. Have you ever had to go up to somebody and like sheepishly go, hey, how does that work? You know what I mean? You ever like had to go to your boss and go, I don't know how to work Excel, though you hired me for a data entry job. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's what they do. They like pull Jesus aside. After seeing angry Jesus, they pull him aside. And in private, they asked, hey, why couldn't we drive that demon out? Why couldn't we heal the way that you healed and also told us that we should be able to heal? Why couldn't we do that? And what Jesus says next is cutting for the Western world. And it's cutting for people who don't feel like they need God on a daily basis. And it's a little bit cutting for people who don't think about beyond natural sort of things. He responds with this. He goes, it's because you have so little faith. Now, again, I grew up in context where we talk about faith as like big and little, as if you had much more of it and much less of it. Like you had to muster up an emotion to go, and it's gonna happen, you know? But it's not that, right? It's funny, because little faith, it doesn't suggest that there's like not faith there. It suggests that whatever's there is weak enough to not be able to see and do the things that God had promised in these moments. In fact, it's kind of like this, and this was fascinating. In moments like this, when something's required of these disciples, it's that little faith, in terms of action, produces the same result as no faith. Now, they're not the same thing, but they produce the same result, which is nothing on the other side of it. And then Jesus gives us this illustration that, again, I think is used in some ways correctly. Again, it is correct, but also just incomplete. And most of us, if you've been around church or those kind of things, you've seen this before, but here's the illustration he gives. He goes, because you have so little faith, he says, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. And nothing will be impossible for you. Which I was brought up to go, like, if you just believe a little bit, then you could and then, it's like functional with a little bit. And I think that's true. Like, I don't think it's that you have to have these massive amounts of like faith to do extraordinary. I don't think that's it. But the mustard seed is one of those things that we talk about in terms of it being small, right? So if we're going to look at this mustard seed, you talk about it in terms of like, if you've ever seen it. How many of you have ever like seen mustard seeds in person? I don't garden. I don't play with plants. Never, I held a mustard seed because of this illustration one time. It's itty bitty, like it's tiny, right? It's tiny. Yeah, there you go. It's this tiny sort of seed. But what's interesting about the mustard seed is it's so small, but it has these really big implications, right? Now, there's this, I'll give you some sort of like backstory to this. What's interesting is early on in the ancient world, it was actually used, like you get a bunch of mustard seeds together, you crush it up, and you could use it as medicine, right? So like in Greek culture in particular, if you got stung by a scorpion because, Greek culture, I don't know, they would actually use mustard seeds, put it up, and this is used as medicine, right? It's just like powerful agent that if you were to plant it, what was interesting is it could grow to be 20, 30 feet high and then all over the place. And then my favorite is there's this legend of two sort of like king, emperor type people who send each other seeds back and forth. Like some of you may know this or have heard this legend before, but it's just fun. This is like King Darius of Persia. And you have Alexander the Great, and I love this. This is so fun. This is like the first Twitter feud. You know what I mean? It's like King Darius sends over to Alexander a bag of sesame seeds. And the legend goes that when he sends him a bag of sesame seeds, it's to intimidate Alexander on how many people is in Darius's army. You know what I mean? So what Alexander does next is he sends back this bigger bag of mustard seeds, right? And so Darius is saying this. Darius is like, I'm sending you these sesame seeds so you know just how big our army is. And Alexander sends him back this massive bag of mustard seeds because the context is the mustard seeds are more fiery and more potent. And he's like, look at my army, but they're already better than yours because they are fiery. You know what I mean? And I love it because the image around this wasn't just a seed, and it wasn't just that it was small. It was that the mustard seed was like connected to this potency and this fiery sort of thing, this expansive sort of thing. And this ancient Jewish culture, right? And this is what's interesting, right? The mustard seed had implications for this first century Jewish audience as well, right? I mean, like this seed in this like ancient sort of Jewish culture, they wouldn't often plant it in their garden, right? This was actually like one of the like small little laws for these people. They wouldn't plant it in the garden because if they planted a mustard seed, it could grow and overwhelm everything else in the garden. It could go and it could ruin, right? It could ruin everything else. And they had these like very strict rules and laws around how everything was to be neat and orderly and together, which means if you planted the mustard seed, it'd just like go. It would just take over everything else, right? There was literally, if you look at it, it's so much fun. If you were to look at this culture, they just didn't do it. They didn't mess with them in that way. They didn't plant them because it was known for messing up the well-ordered and established garden. And so when Jesus says like this faith of a mustard seed, and don't miss this, it's not just that it's small, even though it's small. And he's not just saying just because you have a little faith, you can do great big things. Yes, he's saying that, but he's not just saying that. Right, what mustard seeds do, mustard seeds mess up tidy faith, right? Mustard seed, this imagery, mustard seeds mess up the tidy faith. It gets in there and then it gets involved in everything else. You plant a mustard seed and it gets in everything else about your faith. It messes it all up. Mustard seeds would mess up a safe faith, right? This is what happens, right? All of these other Pharisees and all these other people who would eventually end up killing Jesus. This was so fascinating. All of these other religious leaders who kept all the laws and had it neat and orderly and everything was together. It's like Jesus spoke so deeply to that, going like, this mustard seed faith isn't just that it's small, it messes it up. And what it ultimately does is it disrupts indifference in our lives. When Jesus teaches on mustard seed kind of faith, it's not just that it's small, it's that when you have the kind of faith that's real, when you have the kind of faith that's true, when you have the kind of faith that does something in your heart, it is a part of everything and it disrupts all of it, right? So when we find ourselves, kind of like the disciples, at a place of indifference or not having the kind of faith that Jesus really requires of us, he's when the mustard seed messes it all up in a powerful and beautiful way. Now I want you to think about your life just for a second. So we'll put these up here. Most of us have these areas of responsibility and focus and interests in our lives, right? And this is what we do, right? You get this. Like there are times in our lives where we put on like the family hat and we're focused on family. Sometimes we do this with health. Some of us more than others, you know what I mean? Like you focus on the health. Some of us, when it comes to politics, this is a big one for a lot of people. You know, you feel this too. Like we really, like this is one of the things that we're engaged and responsible for. We're involved in this. Some of us, when it comes to our work, right? You feel this when it comes to work, like this is involved in your work. Or your hobbies, right? How many of you have a hobby that you're like low-key obsessed with? Anybody in the room? Like you get it. Like this becomes a part of your life. You're engaged, you're responsible for it, you're focused on it, right? Then you have like entertainment, right? You have these areas of this time that you spend and invest in what you entertain yourself with. And then one of the buckets is faith, right? But I would say this, it's not that faith becomes one of the buckets that's a part of your life. It's a lens by which you view everything else in your life, right? You don't just work. As people who are followers of Jesus, we work from our faith, right? You don't just have hobbies. Your faith actually, the lens by which you see your life, it affects your hobbies. It affects the way that you entertain yourself. It affects the way you parent and the kind of husband that you are. It affects everything else. It is a lens by which you see the world. It is not a bucket that you engage with at times. Faith and the way you see God and the way that you see him working in the world is the lens by which we see everything, but more specifically, this is what Christianity teaches. Christianity teaches it's not just out there random kind of faith. It's very specific faith, and the lens by which we see everything else is through Jesus. Everything else. So the question for us is like, what would Jesus undo for sure? What would he undo in our lives? What would he undo when it comes to the way that we navigate our family? What would he do when it comes to the way that we navigate our work? What would he do when it comes to the things that we entertain ourselves with? We see everything through that lens, and it affects every part of our lives. Right? Come on, you know this. Those of you who are dads in the room, I'm just for a second, be like, can you get this? I believe that there's a spiritual responsibility you have to your family, right? And you can be indifferent or you can be apathetic, but be apathetic in video games or something. Don't be apathetic when it comes to developing your family spiritually. Don't do that, right? These are the kind of things that would frustrate you. Don't be apathetic when it comes to your faith. Right? Don't be apathetic when it comes to the way that you love and serve your wife. You ask yourself the question, do I love and serve my wife just based off of my view, or do I love and serve my wife as a model for the way that Jesus sacrificed himself for the world? That's the standard. It's not the standard of going like, oh, am I a little bit engaged? No. That's the lens by which you see everything. Those of you who are leaders in the room, when it comes to your work, come on, you know this. It's not, how can I get ahead? It's not, how can I climb the ladder? It's not, how can I get more money? It's not just those things, even though all of those things may be good. It's viewing your work through the lens of what does Jesus call me to do when it comes to my work, and how does it interact with my faith? All right? How many of you ever had one of those WWJD bracelets? Anybody ever have one of these things as a kid or growing up, and by as a kid, I mean maybe even now, I don't know. I had them, and you know this, especially middle schoolers, you would never take it off, and so you would shower with it, and it just started smelling like, well, poop at some point along the way. You know what I mean? They're all raggedy, and some people had like 10 of them, you know. And the sentiment behind this was so fascinating, and I love that it blew up. Because you wear the bracelet, and then you ask yourself the question, what would Jesus do? And it's a little cheesy, but it would change your life if you actually asked that question with everything. Like if you actually asked that question at the office, come on, to be really honest, it would change the way you treat the coworker who gossiped about you behind your back. It changed the way that you deal with a boss who doesn't seem like they care about you and is promoting other people. It changes the way that you navigate your life and your family, and it changes, it changes what you believe is possible through a limitless God. And I'll just tell you this, this is honest, this is me, and I struggle with this as much as anybody in this room. But if you live your life only focusing on these buckets or categories and you miss the lens by which you can see everything through, you might be successful in every one of those buckets and get to the end of your life and not have lived the kind of life that Jesus would call you to live, and you would miss it. And the thing about Christianity that hangs in some ways, the balance, is because Jesus gives us free will. He gives you all of the free will to build the kind of life that you would one day regret having. And that's a haunting thought, and it's true. You know how you know it's true? Because you've talked to those parents. You've talked to those leaders. You've talked to those people that didn't focus on this thing and didn't see their life through the lens of Jesus. Because when you see your life through the lens of Jesus, it is impossible to live it with indifference and apathy, because he didn't live with indifference and apathy. It was urgency and power and strength and discipline in the way that he lived it. So practically, here's what I think this looks like. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, I think what you're going to get over the next couple of minutes is, I think, what like the foundational pieces of being a Jesus follower might look like practically look like for people. And if you're here and you've been a follower of Jesus since you were like 11, for the next couple of minutes, I'll tell you this. This may go like, that is so elementary. And if you feel yourself saying that feels like it's so elementary, the question that comes next is, then great. Then how are you doing with these foundational things right now? I'm like a professional Christian. I went to school for this stuff, and I still struggle with this all the time, right? First thing is this. I want you to ask yourself, how can I reflect Jesus in this situation, mindset, or decision? And don't miss this. In your mindsets and the ways that you think about things, I'm teaching my son this right now. He's like, I have a bad dream. I don't know how to not have a bad dream. And so we like, hey, I want you to dream about the color green. Okay. And then it's a green baseball glove. Yeah. And it's a baseball player with a green batting glove. And then we build this entire scenario in his head to teach him that he can think about things differently, right? That he can choose to build realities in his head. He can be a vision caster in his mind. And you can too. So you can think about your thoughts. And so when you have thoughts that come in that don't align with the lens of Jesus that you should be having for your life, you get to go, I'm going to evaluate that thought and put it up against this, who Jesus is and what he would have me to do and think. When it comes to situations, you know this too. How many of you got a little bit mad this week? And by a little bit, I mean a lot of it. Anybody get a little bit amped this week? Just me? Somebody cut me off, and I was like, I'm so glad I have a Nuvo sticker on my car. That's great. Come to church. Anyway. Come on, there's a piece of you that goes this. In those moments, you feel those things. If I'm evaluating it through the lens of who Jesus is and what he's calling me to do, I reflect back to the world, not my own brokenness, but the redemptive work of Jesus in me. And you have the power to change your actions, thoughts, and mindsets by asking yourself that question and responding to it. The second one is this, and it's both hard and overly simple, it feels like. The second one is this. I think you have to spend daily time with Jesus. Now, this is different than some of us grew up in. I was taught to come up like in a quiet time. Anybody heard the phrase quiet time before? You know, there's like these quiet times, like reflective time. That's great. You can meditate. You can do all these sorts of things. And that's different than spending time with the person of Jesus, right? You can do all sorts of things to quiet your mind. I have the Calm app on my phone. LeBron James read me something with a really pretty music thing behind it the other day, and I was like, let's go, you know? Like, but that's different than spending time with Jesus. Some of you are like, I mean, I don't ever do that. And I'll tell you, it's coming and going. Even if you go, like, I don't even know if you're up there. It feels like I'm praying to a ceiling. That's fine. I'm going to talk to you about it. And you're going to engage with the person of Jesus and invite him into your life on a daily basis. I love this. I talk to people, I tell you this all the time, people who are a lot older and people who've been a follower just for a long time. And I love it when I hear, like, I have a space that I go to. I have a chair. I love it. There's a chair that I go to. There's a place on my deck that I spend time. And it's like, it's the place that they go. I think it's important. Like, where's the place that you go to spend time with Jesus? And when you do this, here's what it looks like. I mean, again, it's pretty simple, but is that you pray, which means you just talk. Like, you don't have to have this like, thus thou saith them, whatever. It's not that. It's like, here's what's happening in me now. And it's not that I don't think you don't know. It's just that here's me. You pray. You ask God for things. You pray as if he has the power and capability to do it. You spend time in prayer. And you pray for the things that matter to you, like your kids. And then you also pray for the things that seem like they're so small because they matter to you, but they matter. Right? You pray. I tell people all the time, one of the easiest things to read the Bible is read a chapter a day. You don't have to read the entire book. Read one chapter. Usually that's pretty, outside of like Psalm 119, I wouldn't start there. Anywhere else, that's like 47 pages. Outside of that, Read a chapter of the day in the New Testament, right? Allow yourself to be immersed in the narrative and the beauty and the power of Jesus. It takes like 3 to 5 minutes. It doesn't take a long time. And then you ask yourself the question, like, what did the text say? What does it say about God, and what does it mean for me now? I went to school for like 5 years. I went to school for 5 years in college. And you could whittle down, now there's a lot to it, but you could whittle down, what does that time look like? It's that. It's looking at the text and saying, what does it say? What does it say about God? And what does it say about my life now, right? Now, before we put up the last one, I want to say this. The last one can feel self-serving because it's me saying it. I'm going to tell you why I'm going to say it. So I'm going to put it up there. You're going to feel like it's self-serving for 11 seconds. And then I'm going to tell you why it's not. Is that okay? All right. The last one is this. I think you need to make a plan to consistently attend church, all right? You need to make a plan for it. I'm going to tell you what I think that means. I think that means like you're coming like 3 times a month, right? I'll put this next one up there. Come 3 times a month. I think you're serving on a team. You're inviting others to be a part. I'll tell you why this matters, right? It feels self-serving because I'm a pastor, and I get it. I'm going to tell you this. You can watch me talk online. You can watch better people than me talk online. You can do that. And if you have kids, you know this. It's important that you're here. You can't really get that as much online. Like you can go watch like the Bible app, which is great, and you should. I think those are great things. But here's what happens when you come into a community like this, and this is why it matters. And this is one of those things that I think in the pandemic can feel like it gets lost. And you're going, well, bro, I'm here. So maybe I should just talk to the camera. For those of you who are not here, I'm just kidding. But here's why this matters, right? Let me tell you why this matters. It's not because we're trying to build a big church, because I've worked at real big ones. It's fine. Here's why this matters. What you can't get on a screen, and what you can't get just in your home, and what you can't get when you come like once every 8 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever that is, what you can't get when you do that is a community of people pursuing the power and the presence of God together. And even if you're an introvert like I am, there's something about the gathered body that's transcendent. And so I can say it this way, and the local church, including the way that I've thought about the local church in times, and I said this to our team earlier, we can very easily and quickly become something that helps you just become a better person and remove all of the transcendent nature of it, remove all the beyond natural pieces of it, right? And you might get better at life, but you also may never actually begin to engage the person of Jesus in community in a way that causes you to see differently and bigger. Because you might be missing the people around you who are spurring you in that direction. But that's not like a guilt thing. I'll tell you what it is. If you want to be the kind of person that experiences the beyond natural pieces of this, I think it requires your engagement in people who push you to see the world bigger and differently than you do. One of the things that's always so fast, I went to a church conference this past week, and it's a bunch of church planners, people have been going for a while, and it's in the late night conversations around the bar, like the Hilton, you know what I mean? It's kind of fun. It's always fun. They're always like slightly lamenting, you know what I mean? Like, it's good, but people might seem disengaged. It's good, but these sort of things. And somebody said a quote, which I thought was so powerful, and they said this. I'll probably butcher it to an extent, but like we taught people how to focus on life simply in a natural way. And then we're surprised when they like revert back to naturalism as a whole way of life, but not dependence on God to do beyond natural kind of things. And I'll just tell you, like, that's true. As much as I hope you live well, and I hope you live well, that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal for you is that you encounter the power and the presence of Jesus Christ, and that his transformative work in your life uniquely causes you to experience the kind of life he's called you to live. I want you to experience Jesus, not religion, not being a little bit better. You get a TED Talk, that's great. I love TED Talks. Brene Brown all day, people. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. The person of Jesus is different than that. And he wants something for you. And I think the local church, of all of its screw-ups and mess-ups and good and bad things, it's also powerful in that it puts you in a community that spurs you on beyond indifference. So I put it in my notes, I said it this way. I was like, it's difficult to live with indifference when you're choosing to live on purpose. it's just hard to do. When you're living on purpose, it breaks down the indifference kind of thing. Right? And then the last thing is this, right? The depth of your faith will be shaped by the disciplines of your heart. There's a piece of you, when I say things like weak faith, you're going, oh, that's deep. That is it. That's what I feel sometimes. I'm just going to tell you, it's through the disciplines of your heart. It's through the disciplines of spending time with Jesus, through the disciplines of opening your Bible and going, I don't even know that I understand everything, but I'm going to show up here consistently. It's through the disciplines of you talking to Jesus. We'll call it prayer all day long, but you talking to Jesus that does something to you. And it's through that discipline of your heart that you begin to experience the power and the depth of your faith. So here's what I'm going to pray for you, and we're going to move through this series. And I'm really excited about where we're going in it, but starting place is this. Here's what I'm going to pray for you. If you're a person who's not a follower of Jesus in the room, what I'm going to pray for you is that and I pray this every week, and I always laugh. I'm like, I hope they come back after I pray this, because I don't know. I think it's interesting. What I'm going to pray for you is that you feel just enough unsettled that it causes you to dive deep enough into these things, right? It causes you to dive deep enough into these sort of places, right? And for those of you who are followers of Jesus in the room, when you talk about your faith and it just doesn't feel like it's exploding, it doesn't feel like you're super engaged, it doesn't feel like those things, I want to pray for you is that you commit to doing the disciplines, and I'm going to pray that you just begin to look for the beyond natural sort of moments. The things that you begin to pray for that are beyond you that you couldn't make happen for yourself anyway. The things that push you beyond indifference and the control just that you have in your life, and you experience the power and the presence of God through that. Then after that, we're going to fill your kids with a lot of sugar, and we're going to leave today. That's cool. All right, let me pray for us. Father, we thank you so much that you care enough about us to give us these texts and these eyewitness accounts. God, we thank you for guys like Matthew who are following Jesus so closely and putting these things down on paper. And we thank you for the fact that Jesus wasn't just the herbal essence, happy-go-lucky white guy with a sash that was just happy all the time, but that there were things that frustrated him, because those things that frustrated him can spur on our faith too. For those of us in the room, that our faith is one of the boxes of our lives, but it's not the lens. God, I pray that you would help us to both repent, meaning turning the other direction, and that we would make our faith, specifically our faith in Jesus, kind of the front of everything that we do. I pray for every leader in the room that they would view their leadership through you and through that lens. I pray for every parent in the room that they view their family through that lens, that we carry those responsibilities well, but not just on our own shoulders, but we view it through the lens of your power and your strength. I pray for the person who's been a follower of you for a long time, and it's been very functional, but it's never been beyond natural. I pray that you would overwhelm them with the power of your presence, God, and that you would give them the kinds of experiences that both anchor their faith and inspire them to move forward. And for those of us who haven't experienced that in a long time, God, give us the disciplines to pursue not just a better life, but to pursue you. And God, I pray for every person in the room who's here and they're curious about their faith, or they're trying to navigate their faith and those sorts of things. And I pray that they would have the intellectual pursuit, and at the same time, as the same vein as that's happening, God, that they would also begin to experience your power and your presence. And even if they don't have language for it, and even if sometimes they feel foolish praying those kinds of prayers, and even if they find themselves in moments where it doesn't even seem like you're there, God, I pray that you would just help them to continually pursue that, and you would meet them on the other side of those prayers and anchor their faith, not just in a random experience, but in the power and the presence of who you are. And the intellectual components of their faith would also come, and that they would be able to have both a reason and a defense for the ways and the whys that they believe. God, we love you so much, and we thank you just as a church that we get to pursue you. And I pray that we would spur each other on, and not just living well, but becoming more of who you've called us to be. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.